My name is Jay Cunningham, and I'll be your moderator this evening. We want to try and get started relatively on time. I understand there may be a sporting event this evening that some may wish to see later on. We might miss a fight or two, but it'll be fine. Okay, to get things started, I'm going to call up Patrick Berkeley from Middlesex Federation to give welcome.
Thank you. I'm Patrick Berkeley. I'm the president of the Middlesex Federation of Agriculture, and like you just said, we just want to thank you all for coming here. It's a bit of a tradition here, and it's been good to be able to work with our neighboring counties and do these things over time, but it's also just, we quite value the opportunity to meet with our candidates and get to hear what you guys are thinking and have this conversation. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Kevin Bagnall, Vice President for Kent Federation.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Again, Kevin Bagnall, Vice President of the Kent Federation of Agriculture. Also, we'd like to welcome the candidates. Glad to see that you've come out this evening, struggling with the weather like everybody else. And on behalf of the Kent Federation, we welcome you and welcome everybody that came out tonight. Thank you.
And last but not least, Brian Eves.
Hey, thanks, Jay. Brian Eves, I'm the president of the Federation of Agriculture. I just want to thank the candidates for taking time out of your schedule tonight to be here with us. We really appreciate the opportunity to have you address our questions. We like the opportunity to have a discussion that really focuses on rural agriculture or rural issues in agriculture, right? So appreciate the opportunity and look forward to some really good, engaging conversation with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this evening we have three candidates for the riding of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex. It's noted that all the candidates running were invited, but some were not able to make it or did not choose to come. So, number one position is Kathy Shaler from the New Democratic Party. Two is Andrena Tillinger, close, from the Green Party. And in the third spot is Kathy Burkhardt-Jessen from the Liberal Party. So we're going to start out with a 3-minute introduction from each, starting, we drew numbers to see what number they would be. So we'll start with Catherine.
And this I take us on, yes. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank the Lambton-Kent and Middlesex Federations of Agriculture and George Dickinson in particular and the moderator for arranging this evening's debate, and to all of you for braving the cold to come out and defer the hockey game until later. A little bit about myself first. After a career that included a decade of credit union leadership in BC and over 40 years of teaching and senior administration in the post-secondary sector, I moved to Alvinston to be closer to one of my daughters and her family. That was the year the Ford government came to power. And through volunteer work in the community, I learned about joys and hardships of rural living, and every year since then, I have seen more and more people struggling. I ran in the by-election last spring, but the stakes are higher now. The reason I'm running is that we cannot afford another 4 years of Doug Ford and his government. The costs of groceries and housing are still ridiculously high. Demand for food banks has skyrocketed. The number of homeless across the province, including in LKM, is up 25% since 2022. And the Association of Municipalities of Ontario calls this a tipping point. 80,000 across the province. Without rent controls or a functioning landlord-tenant board, rents in even modest apartments are untenable. and our children and grandchildren despair at ever owning their own homes. Ford's government has funneled taxpayer dollars into supporting private healthcare providers while starving our public healthcare system. Our prosperity and our children's and grandchildren's future hopes and dreams are in the balance for want of adequate education funding. That's at both the K-12 and the post-secondary level. For lack of funding from the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, our municipalities struggle with the costs of roads, culverts, bridges, arenas, without dramatically raising property taxes. We all need to be prepared for the shoe to drop on tariffs and then counter tariffs with real plans, not showmanship. Lawrence Stiles and the ONDP government have plans to address all these issues and restore hope and prosperity to our communities. And I hope to address all these issues throughout the evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Andrea.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Andrea Tilgner. I am the Green Party candidate for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex. I'm standing in this election because we are at an inflection point in Ontario where the choices we make with healthcare and education will affect our access to these services for the foreseeable future. We currently have 73,000 young people languishing on the wait list for autism therapy services. We experienced 1,200 emergency room and urgent care closures in rural communities in 2023. While the numbers are not finalized, for 2024 they've increased. Our rural communities are struggling to meet financial demands that are the result of provincial downloading under the Conservative government. It is estimated that we have 81,000 people in the province of Ontario who are currently unhoused and either couch surfing, living in shelters, or living rough. In rural communities, this represents a 150% increase since 2016. I'm standing for the Green Party of Ontario because these issues can be addressed while also protecting our green spaces, waterways and farmland from urban sprawl and runaway development. The Greens have a complete party platform that has been fully costed and is available for you to review on the GPO website and my website, ndtforgreen.ca. Thank you.
Okay, Kathy.
Thank you.
Good to go?
Well, thank you very much to the Lambton-Kent-Middlesex OFA organizations for putting tonight together, and to all of you for coming out and, as my colleagues have said, braving the cold and putting the hockey game off for a little bit. These are important meetings because they provide an opportunity for voters to hear directly from the candidates. These meetings that have been organized promote accountability and transparency and make for informed voting when you go to the polls. So a little bit about me. I am the Mayor of Lucan-Biddulph, which is the northeast corner of this riding. I've been mayor since 2010, or since 2014, excuse me, on council since 2010. I am a member of Middlesex County Council and have had the privilege to be warden 3 times. So I do have a proven track record. So this is the second night that the 3 of us have been together as a panel in a meeting like this. And for the second night in a row, the party that is in power, the party that felt we needed an election, is not here. And I don't know about you, but I'm more than a little disappointed in that. As a candidate, it's deflating, because I'm here to take your questions. And I'll be honest, this isn't the easiest thing to do, to sit up here under the spotlight and take questions that we haven't been handed to before. But I'm here because that's what is expected. As a voter, it's even more troubling. It feels like a slap in the face. Why call an election if you can't show up to defend your record? Is there something that you're trying to hide? And what do you not want to answer to? We've been told that this election is about one thing, protecting you, but nothing could be further from the truth. If it was about you, the candidate would be here to hear from you. It would seem that this party's directive begs the question, if the party can't show up for you tonight, then how do you know they're going to show up when it really matters? I really do look forward to the conversation that we're going to have tonight. I'm anxious to hear the questions. I know that they will be thoughtful and they will be personal to you and your experiences, so let's get the discussion going.
Okay, thank you. Just before we get started, remind everyone to please silence your phones before we get started. I know I just thought to do mine. We will not be taking questions from the floor, as this has been the practice of this event, but we do have people throughout the hallway that are putting their hands up now, and they are going to be very happy to pick up your question and bring them to the front, and then they'll be passed on to me. So with that, we'll get started. Okay. Yes, 2 minutes for each question, and we'll get started. Okay, first question, and we'll start with Catherine. How will you or your party provide support to offset the rising cost of food production?
Food production costs, just like about everything else, are rising. And the best way to protect farmers from the rising cost of food production is to ensure that they get a fair price for their product. The Ontario NDP has talked about holding grocery stores accountable for their code of conduct that gives producers a fair price for their produce and product, all the agricultural product. And beyond that, we want to do more in ensuring a safe supply of food we favor the idea of food hubs, we favor the idea of food sovereignty. Many farmers are now looking at alternative ways within their communities to not just cut out the middleman, but deal more directly with the community, with memberships and that sort of thing. So we would support all of these things to help support the farmers get the fair price and deal with the higher costs of their food.
Okay, thank you. Andrea, and if at any time you need the question repeated, just let me know.
Thank you. I think I'm good. So agriculture in Ontario is a $50 billion industry. Over 300 acres of farmland are lost per day in Ontario. Excuse me. So the Green Party proposes a few things to address costs in farming. Firstly, we want to provide tax incentives for local food. Better problem my throat. Local tax incentives for local, thank you. Local food and beverage manufacturers. Do you want me to answer first? Please do, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, that would be great, thank you, Kathy.
So the Ontario Liberal Party has developed, I think, a very forward-thinking program and platform when it comes to supporting food production in the province and making it more affordable for those involved in the industry. We really want to build a resilient supply chain to bolster food security and strengthen local economies. We'll develop a local food development fund, and this will support the innovative local agricultural and food processing projects that are already taking place, but we'll invest in that even more. You know, the threat from the south, I think, has really given us an opportunity to look at different markets, and you can already see provinces having that there will be discussions amongst the provinces about opening up borders and expanding our markets that way. And this will provide different markets for our agri-food economies to be open to. You know, the other thing is we have to invest in processing in this province, and that hasn't been done in a meaningful way in a number of years. Recently, you received a $200 check from courtesy of the Premier, and that cost our province $3 billion for every Ontarian to get $200. If we had spent that elsewhere, we could have built 3 pork producing plants across the province. And I know that there's a real need. So the Liberals will invest in that sort of technology and invest in processing in our province so that we can be processing our foods closer to our homes and not having to transport it across the province as we've been doing.
Thank you. Adriana?
Sorry, thank you, Kathy, for stepping in there. Sorry. The Green Party is going to establish a food processing infrastructure fund to support investments by Ontario-based companies in food processing facilities. We want to increase provincial investment in ag tech to support innovation in the food and farming sector, including research in low-carbon grain drying and greenhouse heating solutions. We support supply management, and we plan to defend Ontario food and farmers in trade negotiations. We want to prioritize Ontario-grown food by developing local sustainable procurement guidelines for public institutions as well. So, in the face of tariff threats, let's start buying from home. We want to introduce a provincial program to pay farmers for environmental goods and services by working with organizations such as Alternative Land Use Services, and reward farmers that are already doing the good work of protecting our waterways and providing buffer zones. We want to eliminate property tax penalties for farmers with small-scale value-added production facilities on farms as well. Let's start building that extra step in our agriculture system and keep that food close to home instead of shipping it over the border. Finally, we want to promote training and specialty programs that focus on sustainable practices in soil health with agricultural schools and extension services.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We're going to start with Adrian. Are you still okay to start the next one? Okay, there we go. Good. The next question. How will your party work to support rural infrastructure projects, including roads, bridges, and local community centers, much like the one we're in tonight?
That's
Adriana, you're first. Yep.
Okay. So, the Green Party is proposing a new deal for communities and municipalities. We want to grant municipalities autonomy in implementing revenue tools to fund critical infrastructure needs and services, first of all. We want to upload costs back to the province that have previously been unfairly downloaded into municipalities, like community housing, shelters, and transit funding. We want to provide dedicated and ongoing funding to municipalities to address the mental health and addictions crisis. We want to reinstate upper-tier regional planning authority to ensure coordinated and sustainable planning. To build housing, we need while protecting agricultural and natural heritage. We also want to increase collaboration and consultation between municipalities in the province. And finally, we want to assess the use of city charters, and this applies more to Toronto, but we want to use them as a mechanism to empower major Ontario cities such as Toronto and prevent inappropriate interference in local democracy by the provincial government.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
Well, rural infrastructure is something that I'm incredibly familiar with, and it has not been invested in the way that it should be. Right now, municipalities have to compete against other municipalities for funding dollars, and that has to stop. So the Ontario Liberals will establish a Better Communities Fund that will be a sustainable fund that we don't have to compete against other municipalities. Quite often when a grant comes out, you have a community much the size of Alvinston having to compete against a Hamilton for the same funding dollars. And small, urban, and rural municipalities do not have the people infrastructure to go through the paperwork to apply for this fund. So we'll establish sustainable funding that municipalities can rely on. And like the Green Party, we will establish a new deal with municipalities. Right now, funding to municipalities is not fair. Property taxes, the way they are established now, are not set up to pay for the things that have been downloaded onto municipalities. And it's time municipalities had a new deal with the province, much like a new deal has happened for the city of Ottawa and the city of Toronto. It's time for small, urban, and rural municipalities to have the same respect from our provincial government, and that'll be the first thing that a Liberal government does.
Thank you. Catherine?
The Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund was established by the Liberals back in 2005 and started off okay, although there was some adjustment to what was being downloaded and versus uploaded in small municipalities versus large municipalities. But then in 2012, that Liberal government slashed the funding significantly, and it went down each year until 2018, when the Ford government came to power, and they just froze it. So that any plan for moving it up again, I think the Liberals did before that election. That didn't happen. So just before this election, in December, November, December, the Ford government sprinkled around a little bit of funding to bring it back to where it had been before they were elected. But Brooke Alvinston got nothing in the way of an increase, which is really a cut. So what an Ontario New Democratic Party government would do is restore funding to that fund and to municipalities. It would upload the costs of social housing, which has been rather unfair. And it would ensure that there is sufficient money there for, restoring, okay, before we get to that, funding for places like this arena. We need $2 million here, right now, to restore that flooring and the ice. We need a regional fund, because there's more than just the people of Brooke Alvinston who use this arena. We need to be looking at this on a more regional basis, in addition to funding for the OMPF. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question number 3, we'll start with Kathy. How will you or your party support or expand supply management in Ontario? And this is in light of the tariff threats that have recently been received.
Well, I think the first, as I said in the 2 questions ago, we will bolster a supply chain, or will invest in a supply chain to bolster our local economies. Doing that, we will establish a food development fund, we'll open up markets, and have those interprovincial barriers dropped. That's what we will negotiate towards. We believe that if we open up more markets, that will create a stronger supply chain for everyone. We will foster agricultural research. I think that sometimes the agricultural community doesn't get enough credit for the research that they are already doing. We will support the research and technology advancements that are being done in agricultural and rural communities so that they can support the technologies and advancements that you're already experiencing so that you can grow your economies with that.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
Supply management is actually a Canadian innovation that goes back to the 60s that would help protect perishable industries like poultry, eggs, dairy. And Ontario was among the first with Quebec, and then BC came on board, and in the 70s all the provinces joined in. And it is something that's basically handled at a federal level. However, it's something that the Ontario NDP supports. We would like to see it continued. It probably needs a little more expanding, particularly in light of the tariff threat, and also in light of aging farmers and the need to be looking at how we pass this on to the next generation of farmers.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Thank you. Supply management's great, as long as it's being applied fairly. If we're importing milk and other products that compete with products that we supply via supply management, it's not really a fair system for us. The Greens will support supply management and defend supply management in tariff negotiations. We can expand supply management as needed, but as it stands right now, it is just something that we would simply defend.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're back to number one. Catherine, this question: how will your party actively explore and promote new investment opportunities in processing capacities for grain and livestock farmers in Ontario?
This is something we need to do, whether the shoe drops on tariffs or not. We need to build greater resilience here. But beyond expanding agricultural use in industries, which could be biofuels, or it could also be packaging, plant-based packaging to replace plastics. Investment in rural communities could include, and will include under an NDP government, various things that will expand affordable housing, infrastructure, the crumbling infrastructure of our schools, which needs to be addressed. So considerable funds will be put into those things and employ people and invest in our communities for housing, for better schools and facilities, and then also for new industries. We need to put more research into industries like biofuels and packaging, and that's a future. Not only is it good for the environment, it's going to be good for our communities.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Thank you. Can I actually get a repeat on the question?
You sure can. How will your party actively explore and promote new investment opportunities in processing capacity for grain and livestock farmers in Ontario?
Thank you. So first, we want to invest in local food hubs and support local farmers, supply chains, and businesses. Next, we want to increase funding, remove cap and expand business risk management programs that are available to farmers. We want to establish a food processing infrastructure fund to support investments by Ontario-based companies in food processing facilities. And we want to increase provincial investment in ag tech to support innovation in the food and farming sector, including research in low-carbon grain drying and greenhouse heating solutions. We want to eliminate property tax penalties for farmers with small-scale value-added production facilities on site on your farms. We want to increase the employer health tax exemption to $1.5 million for small businesses to relieve some of that pressure. And we want to support tech startups to build stronger partnerships between industry, academia, and government to increase their success and help support them to remain in our communities.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
So we have recognized the need to expand processing across Ontario. As I said earlier, processing in various, whether it's grains or in our livestock economies, has not been invested in years. And we are constantly transporting from one end of the province. It's processed here and moved there and moved back, or processed there and moved here. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. So we'll enhance value-added processing capacity, and we will actively attract new private sector investment, but we'll support the modernization in collaboration with our agri-food partners. So we need the private sector to be on board, but we will support them through modernization funds so that we can be processing close to home and not having to truck it to the other side of the province. We'll support innovative local agriculture and food processing projects. As I said, the egg industry is already doing innovative things, and how can we grow those locally and capitalize on already the work that you're already doing? We'll invest in that so local food can stay local.
Okay, thank you. This question will start with Andrea. What is your party's position on the preservation of the finite resource that is farmland? And what are the conditions under which your party would consider using expropriation? Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, we don't have an official platform policy on expropriation per se, but we definitely want to create a food belt in Ontario and protect our farmland from urban sprawl. Most of our policies, including our housing policies, speak to this as well. We want to freeze urban boundaries. We want to promote and fund our deeply cost-effective housing within urban boundaries along transportation routes that are also cost-effective and affordable. In addition to that, we want to support farmers who are already participating in programs that benefit all of us, protecting waterways and natural spaces. And yeah, and that's about it. We would also reestablish our protections for the green belt.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
So if you think Doug Ford is your friend, he's not, because he has just opened up the Wild West when it comes to expropriating lands. If you think that your land is protected now, it isn't. We need to reopen the provincial policy statement, because right now, the way it stands, municipalities do not have the ability to develop their communities the way they want, whether it is what it looks urbanly and what it looks like rurally. Right now, if a developer comes to a municipality and says that they want their lands, that they bought lands and they want it to be now developed and part of the urban growth boundary, a municipality really has no say anymore. There used to be a process that municipalities went through. It was a mathematical thing. Can't tell you how it happened, how it came to be, but it was a mathematical equation, and municipalities could only grow by so much. Because small urban and rural municipalities like us, we are limited to how we grow. The lands that we grow by have to usually come from ag lands. So we need to do that methodically, and we need to do that with thoughtful care. These are resources that we depend on. Farmers feed our families, and we just can't open up the floodgates, but that's what's happened. So the first thing we'll do is we'll reopen the provincial policy statement to change the planning laws, to give municipalities the ability to grow the way they need to and protect your farmlands. We'll also support families through succession planning supports when we think about land trusts and that sort of thing. There needs to be investments and supports for families so that agriculture still can remain within families.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
I can't think of any good reason to support expropriation. The Ontario NDP has actively advocated against the decline of farmland, or the taking of farmland. Even for the placement of something that we did support, like the EV plant, it still went on prime farmland. It should not have been there. There are a lot of good ideas that are being put in the wrong places, and there need to be regulations against that. The agriculture critic and with the ONDP brought forward a private member bill a couple of years ago called Protect Our Farmland, in which it would have required an agricultural impact assessment before any land changed hands or was rezoned. And we would certainly want to bring that back That was defeated, by the way, by the Conservatives. The rapid rate at which under the Ford government the farmland has been declining is scary. In 2016, it was 175 acres a day. That jumped up to 319 a couple of years ago, and I'm not even sure that's been really properly assessed in more recent years. So, yes, the Ontario NDP will do everything possible to protect farmland and support farmers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we start with Kathy. Question number 6. What is your party's position on the future of risk management programs for Ontario farmers?
Well, we know that it needs to be invested in because it hasn't been invested in any meaningful way. And the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, during her leadership run, she made the commitment to invest in risk management programs to what the OFA wants, to $250 million. And then that was confirmed at the OFA general meeting back in December. I'm sure many of you were there. Actually, I had the opportunity to be a panelist on one of the panel discussions. But Ted Sue was there, who's the Liberal ag critic, and he confirmed that a Liberal Party government will invest, as per the OFA request, to $250 million. Now, I know the Conservatives made that announcement just prior to the drop of the red, and that got all of the attention, but it is a commitment that we made long ago, and we will stick to it.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
With the growing uncertainty each year, whether it has to do with climate, weather, or things happening south of the border, it's become riskier, and we need to have our farmers' backs. The Ontario NDP would take the cap off of the risk management program to give you that security and to know that we will have your back. There are built-in safeguards to that. It's not like you can just go in and dig for whatever you want. Taking off the cap gives you security and stability.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
So I think we can all agree that farming is inherently a risky business. Probably all faced up years and down years. The Green Party does propose increasing funding and removing the cap and expand business risk management programs, similar to both the Liberals and the NDP. And that just goes along with our support for other programs that we're proposing for farmers.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're back to Catherine. Question number 7. What is your party's plan to improve rural health care?
Well, healthcare is the biggest issue across this province, and rural communities have suffered more than ever. When it comes to hospitals, hospital funding is at the lowest in the country for this province, and there have been more closures of ERs, more closures of various departments in rural communities than there have been in larger municipalities. 2.5 million Ontarians are without a doctor or a primary caregiver. And so the first thing we need to do is to invest in what it will take to give all of those people who are waiting for a primary caregiver now, and all of the people that are projected to be without a primary caregiver. It's supposed to go up to 4.4 million within the next 2 years. And so we need to invest sufficiently in that. We are committed to over $4 billion over the next 4 years to do that, to have primary care teams for every Ontarian, and that includes across rural and northern Ontario. We need to bring our nurses back, and they need to be properly funded. after we held them, the whole private sector, to a 1% increase back during COVID and inflation. Many nurses and teachers left at that time. We need to bring them back and properly fund them. So yes, healthcare is important to us.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Thank you. So in 2003, we had 1,200 emergency room and urgent care closures across the province, mostly in rural communities. We are at a point right now where we are facing pressures from privatization, where we're paying more per service for the exact same service that's offered in the public system. In rural Ontario, we're having to travel into larger centers of excellence, yes, but why can't we have some of these services offered in rural Ontario? The Ontario Greens want to support family health teams. We want to expand the scope of practice for nurse practitioners, and we want to recruit more doctors and nurses. We want to retain the ones that we have too. We want to provide reasonable workloads, competitive wages across the board, equal pay for equal work. Let's draw some professionals back into the rural communities instead of drawing them all to the urban centers. If we can staff our rural hospitals effectively, it takes the pressure off our urban centers as well. It benefits everybody. We're looking to increase fast-track credential approvals for international healthcare providers as well. We want to pay healthcare workers fairly across the healthcare system. And we want to work with primary healthcare providers to dramatically decrease administrative demands too. And you can achieve that on family health teams. You share administrative resources between several different professions. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
So there's no question that rural communities have been abandoned by this government, and our rural hospitals have been neglected. In this community, and expanded to Strathroy, so from Strathroy to Brook, Alvinston, and all of East Lambton, in 2020, there was over 3,000 people that were without a family doctor. In 2023, that number has gone to over 4,000. So that's 4,000 of your neighbors that do not have access to family health care. We will invest in medical schools so that we can get more doctors through medical school, but like the Greens, and I believe the NPP, will fast track doctors who have immigrated to our country, nurses who have immigrated to our country, so that they can actually practice what they went to school for. We'll incentivize new graduates to come to rural communities, to practice here. I mean, we all know that it's a great place to work, live, and play, and we'll incentivize doctors to set up practice here. When it comes to how we will fight tariffs or deal with tariffs, we'll also incentivize those doctors and nurses that have left the province and left the country for other opportunities to come back to Ontario to practice healthcare here in Ontario, and bring them back home. They all want to come home, and we'll make it worth their while.
Okay, thank you. Starting with Andrea. Next question. With multiple demands on taxpayer funding, how will you work with other levels of government to make sure projects are funded in the most economical way?
That's a really good question. First of all, with the new deal with municipalities, we'll be changing how that is negotiated. We have to look at where the funding is coming from, and also where the existing programs are. What we have in place, we don't necessarily need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but for programming in rural communities, things like a nurse practitioner team, if we're going back to healthcare, Nurse practitioners in the London area have even begun opening their own clinics and charging privately because there's no way for them to bill OPEB. So by changing how we do things, we don't necessarily have to change how much money we're throwing at something, although in the case of healthcare and education, we certainly do need to fund them. But how we do things can influence our outcomes as well.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
Well, first of all, we will reprioritize the spending that has been happening the last 7 years. So there won't be any more wasteful deals on spas at Ontario Place, or closing down the Science Centre, or a 150 billion tunnel under the 401 that is just a whim project. We'll actually put the money back to where it needs to go, to services that benefit you. We'll strike a new deal for municipalities so that they can have sustainable, reliable funding that they know where it's coming from. And we'll work with the federal government to go back to the days of programs that were 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. As a municipal leader, I can't tell you how beneficial those programs are. And they're easy to administer. And it's actually a program that municipalities can afford. And if they know that they're responsible for 1/3 of a project, they can work towards saving that up. It's easy borrowing, and everybody's got skin in the game, the feds, the province, and municipalities. So we'll go back to the drawing table. We'll work with the federal government to draw up a new agreement so that we can get back to those 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 programs. Those are the sustainable funding models that we can rely on, that are easy to administer, and municipalities and ratepayers can depend on.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
I think we all look for economical funding of projects. I just want to point out something that is largely a myth, and that has to do with NDP budgets. There's a study from 2015 that shows actually that of all of the large parties, the NDP has had the most efficient governments, way better than the Liberals and the Conservatives. So partnering is part of that. Partnering with the federal government on various agricultural programs, and partnering, I think what we need to be doing more with is at the municipal and regional level, on big things like, I talked about this arena and the need for $2 million to replace the flooring and the chillers so that we can have proper ice. And we're not alone. There are a lot of arenas in Southwest Ontario and actually throughout the province that need better funding. They can't do it through the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. And taxpayers are overburdened as it is. So regional funding, partnerships of that nature are a very good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next question, we'll start with Kathy, and it's a bit of a long one. What is your party's position on the continuing trend of consolidation in agriculture? How will your party help farms find new farm workers? And how would your party support new pathways to farm management and ownership for those not born into established farming enterprises?
Well, there's no question investing in workers to come to farms is something that is necessary. We know the importance of the migrant farm worker program, and that needs to continue, and that needs to be bolstered. But we also have to think about how we can make it more affordable for young people to get into farming. And so we need to think about succession planning and supporting that, and thinking about land transfer tax and how that can be eliminated for young people wanting to get into farming, so that purchasing land is more affordable for them. Farmers, they want to pass their land off to their kids, but the transfer is too high and they can't afford to pay it. So we've got to make sure we look at that so that it is more affordable. Another farmer would like to buy your land, but the land values are too high for them to afford. So again, a land transfer tax break for farming would help that. You know, we have to look at how developers come in and artificially inflate the value of land. And I think that it goes back to what I said about a proper planning policy statement from the province that gives municipalities control over how lands are designated so that developers just can't come in and artificially inflate the value of land so that it's no longer affordable for those that want to get into farming.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, this is a tough one, yeah, but it's something that a government should be able to help with. And there are other measures out there as well. There are things like the farmland trust that would help with succession planning and help with ensuring that your farmland stays agricultural. But supporting young farmers is important, and we need to do this in a couple of ways. Through subsidizing loans to young farmers who want to get into farming. Maybe they don't, maybe it's a couple of generations away, or maybe they simply can't afford to get into it. And equipment today, not just the land, is horrendously expensive. So there needs to be support in that. But also through the schools. There needs to be more effort to have programs that draw kids into agriculture through co-op programming. There's some of that now, but we need to put more into that. There's a big skills development fund that the current government has that goes to employers. Well, we need to put that also into agriculture and into attracting and training our next generation of farmers.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Thank you. So the Green Party platform addresses several things directly to do with farming, but we also support small business. And part of that is supporting new buyers or employees to purchase existing small businesses upon the owner's retirement by simplifying employee ownership trusts and corporation to worker co-op conversions, establish a next-gen ownership fund to assist aspiring entrepreneurs with business purchases. That applies to farms too. We also want to eliminate property tax penalties for farmers with small-scale value-added production facilities on farms. I think this is particularly important. I don't know about the folks in this room, but I personally know farmers that have more than one job just to keep their farm going. So it would be lovely to set this up so that you can actually invest in your own business and have a value-added production facility on site. We also want to promote training and specialty programs, particularly that focus on sustainable practices in soil health within agricultural schools and extension services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question, question 10. We'll start with Catherine. How will you ensure the safe management of landfill sites across Ontario and prevent their redevelopment to solve Ontario's garbage problem at the expense of rural communities and agricultural land?
This shouldn't be happening, and we've got a great example of this in Dresden right now with the what's commonly called the Dresden dump down there, where a small landfill was taken advantage of. It hadn't been really used as a landfill. Maybe there was some ash from, I think it was from a tile industry. And in any event, it was being, the proposal, and it's still on the books. It's still waiting for an environmental assessment. It has not been stopped by the Ford government. An Ontario NDP government would stop it, shut it down. The idea of an agricultural impact assessment, if we got that through, that would also prevent these previous small landfills from being developed into bigger ones and dumping grounds for urban centers. But we also understand that there is a need for dealing with waste, but it needs to be dealt with closer to where it comes from. So not taken out to rural communities, but landfills and possibly better than landfill solutions in urban environments.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Thank you. And I just want to echo what Catherine just said. Rural communities are not the dumping ground of our cities. We do have needs for dumps and waste disposal. However, there are things that we can do to mitigate that. Part of a new deal for municipalities would increase collaboration and consultation between municipalities and the province, and that would include things like adding capacity to dumping sites. We also would assess the use of city charters again as mechanisms used by the provincial government and strengthen the municipality's ability to make decisions on its own behalf. And in addition to that, we have solutions at hand for a lot of the waste that comes out of Ontario. We just haven't had the will to implement it. Let's talk about our bottle return system. We have an excellent bottle return system that's already in place for alcoholic beverages through the beer store. Why can't we expand that? Let's reduce the amount of waste that we're actually producing so that we can better manage our dump sites overall. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
Well, I do think that we can all agree that, rural Canada is not the dumping, or rural Ontario is not the dumping grounds for the rest of Ontario. And we have to look at how we manage our waste. Landfills are important, there's no question, but we have to think about waste diversion. We have to look at increasing our recycling. And we have to think about the impacts on the environment and on the agriculture when we develop landfills responsibly. Catherine mentioned around the corner, not far from here in Dresden. And I think that the concerning thing about the York One site in Dresden is that is not the only site in Ontario. There are I would probably say there are thousands of sites like that across the province. And it is easy, it is such an easy signature on a piece of paper to close that loophole of dormant licenses, and yet this government has shown no interest in that. They've not visited the York One site, they don't know, they haven't educated themselves. And I think certainly what's opened my eyes is, again, if it can happen in Dresden, it can happen anywhere. And so we have to look at closing those loopholes on those dormant licenses so that small communities can't be opened up to something like this happening in their backyard.
Okay, thank you. Next question, we'll start with Andrea. It's a short one. What would you do to support new rural economic development?
Thank you. So we've spoken a little bit about food and farming and smaller communities. So we want to create some green jobs. We want a green economy. We want to invest in an Ontario strategy to create more jobs and prosperity by making Ontario a global leader in the $2 trillion green economy. We want to create new jobs by retrofitting 40% of existing homes and workplaces to net zero by 2035 and 100% by 2045. We want to give 60,000 people the skills and experience to work in the green economy through a year of free college tuition, plus a year-long apprenticeship when they graduate. We want to implement a green hydrogen and ammonia strategy. We want to implement tax credits for investments to decarbonize businesses and industry. We want to create an industrial efficiency support program that provides collaboration opportunities with local green technology and green energy companies to allow emissions reductions for heavy emitting industries. We want to create a fund to support green tech startups. And we want to fund colleges appropriately so that they can offer programs for training in the trades. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just before we let Kathy go next, just to let everybody know, we are winding down on the questions. So if you do have that overwhelmingly burning question that you haven't shared with us yet, please write it down and put your hand up and one of the people will come and get it. Okay, thank you. Kathy?
So rural economic development, that can be a lot of different things if we think about what our rural communities look like. Obviously, we have talked about investing in agribusiness and supporting our farmers and that, but it's also the other services that go along with building a vibrant community and a vibrant economic platform. So there is a program that OMAFRA runs, and it's called the RED program, and it is a funding program that municipalities can apply for to help support economic development programs in their community to support small businesses. That really hasn't been invested in or substantially grown over a number of years. Just before the election, the current government did, of course, announce more funding for it. But again, it's a competitive program, so Liberal government would invest heavily in that because these do support small businesses and your neighbors. We will introduce a small business tax reduction, so money can go back into either more employees or investing in your whatever it is that your store or business is. You can put money right back into what you're doing. We will enhance apprenticeship and co-op programs so that students can work in communities and maybe stay in the community after getting their apprenticeship or having a co-op placement. They can work right in our rural communities.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
The bedrock of economic prosperity is education. And the second piece of that is proper health care. So to begin with, properly funding education and health care will be a big investment in rural economic development that would attract people back to communities that have been losing population. And then the housing that we want to build, affordable housing, these need to be built, and we need people to build them. So even having that housing, let alone providing jobs, building that housing, will be a good investment in rural communities. Infrastructure in the communities, in the schools, all of that will create jobs, and it will create a stable, prosperous community. And then the bio-industries that I talked about, these alternative industries that we need to look at for better resilience, whether or not we're facing the tariffs. We need to invest in that. And that starts with proper research, and then we look at models. There are models already for this in places like Saskatchewan and in Europe, and we can do that here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next, Kathy. There is a rural-urban divide, just as there is a divide between food producers and food consumers. However, we are now at a point where each side struggles to understand the sacrifices needed for the benefit of the whole. How would you and your party heal the rural-urban divide?
That almost sounds like a peace talk that would have to be administered in some way. You know, it's a discussion that I have at my own municipality. Our urban centers, and when I say urban, I mean that's just a generic term. I don't necessarily consider Lucan an urban center, but it is our town center. And it is growing. And communities have to grow. They have to grow. But our rural neighbors and friends often feel that we grow at the expense of them. And I think that happens a lot because of the demands that have been put on municipalities. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but a new deal has to come with to municipalities so that investments can be made both in our town centers and in our more rural communities. There's a reason why people move to our communities, and you know, as a municipal leader or as a sitting MPP, it's all about promoting what you've got to offer as a community. And you would hope that as you bring new neighbors in, that those relationships would be built, that you know there wouldn't be that divide. But I think people don't often know what it's like to live in a small community if they've come from an urban center. So it's just about, you know, making good neighbors, creating policy that you can build a community and everybody is a part of a community, inclusivity, that sort of thing. I don't think that there's as much that divides us as we think. And I just think it means honest, open communication and proper investments made in our communities.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
Oh, I think it does exist, but there are ways to break it down. And part of it is investing in our rural communities so that they are the attractive places that people from the city come out and say, ooh, this looks nice, I think I will stick around for a while. There are things like agritourism, ecotourism, that would help bring people out and show them around and what it's like to be in a community like this. And also funding community arts that reflect what rural communities are like is a wonderful way of showing people how wonderful rural communities are. And I could just write something about that myself because I came to a rural community after teaching at universities and urban centers for most of my life. And I can tell you it's a great place to live. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Adriana?
Thank you. So I think we have a couple of things at play. Firstly, distribution of resources. When we sit out in smaller communities and we're discussing whether we have enough capacity in our wastewater treatment plants, and we see money being spent on a private spa in Toronto, it's a little hard to stomach. There is a divide, and you're right, Catherine, too. We need to fund our basic infrastructure. That's part of our social contract. We pay our taxes, we expect certain things in return. We want our schools to be well funded. We want to be able to access medical care when we need it. The other piece is good fences make good neighbors. When we have a constant encroachment, we're losing 300 acres per day of rural land to urban sprawl, among other things. We have people who have different expectations that end up living right on the boundary. And you're going to have conflict over things like people having to spread manure on their fields or burn off a deadfall. Freezing urban boundaries and focusing development, affordable development along transportation routes will help to address some of that. And then we move forward from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We're starting back with Catherine. What is your party's position on out-of-province or out-of-country ownership of farmland?
Honestly, I'm not sure we have one. So I don't want to fumble around on that. But the whole idea of protecting farmland and protecting it from being rezoned and having an agricultural impact assessment before farmland changes hands would in fact look at that.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
I was just looking to see if we had something specific to that. We focus a lot on local development, investing in local food hubs, local food processing. It doesn't address foreign ownership though. But personally, I know that we have issues with it. I know that in Niagara, they faced buy-up of prime orchard land that was then just scrapped in favor of produce south of the border. And you can drive through there and see those pieces of property now. And it is a concern, and I think it's something that we do need to look at.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
So we don't have a specific platform policy statement on foreign ownership. But, you know, much like my colleagues, I think that it's something that we have to recognize and be aware of. We can support farmers through succession planning, supports, that sort of thing. And again, the protectionisms of land designations, giving power back to municipalities on how they grow, and not letting zoning just happen at a whim. Those are protections that can be put in place, but we don't have a statement on foreign ownership per se.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we'll start with Andrea. All three candidates have indicated that they support healthcare, education, and rural infrastructure. Giving more money to support these priorities is expensive. Where will your party get the additional money to expand this support?
Thank you. First of all, does rural Ontario deserve less than urban Ontario? We have a huge infrastructure backlog. We contribute hugely to the Ontario economy. And these are services, again, that this is an expectation. Any government that comes into power and can't deliver on the basics, and these are the basics, is a failed government, period. Sure, it's expensive. You know what's more expensive? Private healthcare to every single one of us. Public healthcare, publicly delivered public healthcare, is the most cost-effective delivery model for healthcare worldwide. So yes, it's expensive, but you don't want to be paying out of pocket. If we allow American-style healthcare into our system to get a foothold, we will be facing a massive political influence. Once the money starts being made off of people's misery, you're not going to be able to get it out of Canada. They're facing that in the States right now. It's not something that I want for my children. And every single thing that we mention in our platform, the Greens have costed. You can visit my website, andytforgreen.ca. I've got the platform button on my website, and I have the costing. If we have money for billion-dollar tunnels, spas, Highway 413, we can direct our money to the things that we actually need and want. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
So the first thing is, it's just reprioritizing the money that the government already has. And, you know, we can't say it enough. I mean, $150 billion to build a tunnel, $300 billion to give us all $200, $189 million that this election is costing, the $1.9 billion to put booze into our convenience stores much faster. You know, that's all wasteful spending. $1 billion will give us over 13,000 new nurses in the province. It'll give us over 10,000 teachers and teaching assistants. It'll give us 1,500 long-term care beds. It'll give us 7,500 affordable housing units. So by reprioritizing the money, that's where we'll start. Investing in infrastructure, we've seen over the years when we've run into economic problems, when government invests in infrastructure, it's an automatic stimulus to the economy. So to start there, our rural municipalities have not been invested in when it comes to proper infrastructure. My home community, Andrea's home community, we're both from Lucan. We need a new water and wastewater treatment plant, and we need the province to be a partner in this. And we're not even being looked at because we're a small urban rural community. So infrastructure is the easiest path to stimulus because it's jobs, it's reliable, and it happens fast. So let's get infrastructure into our communities, and the reprioritizing of the wasteful spending, let's spend the money on you.
Thank you. Catherine?
I would re-echo everything that my colleagues have said here, but I want to focus on the privatization of healthcare and what that has cost us. We are below the average, just the average. We're the lowest funding per person for public health care in Canada. And just from the average in Canada, we are $813 less per person. And our population is over 15 million. So take that 15 million times 813, and you come up with over 12 billion. 12 billion. What can we do with that? So when we're talking about putting $4 billion into doctors and healthcare, and we're talking about spending $3 billion on schools, just restoring the $1,500 per student that it was cut in the last years since the Ford government came to power. These are the fundamental things that we can get if we just stop privatizing and bring back our public health care system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is our last question. And we'll start with Kathy. Farming is a stressful way of life. What support will your party provide to help farmers and their families handle mental health struggles that they may face?
So we need to invest in mental health supports, there's no question. And not, with all due respect, not just in the agricultural community. It's right across the board. And there has not been meaningful investment made in mental health supports, especially for our rural communities. Right now there is a program, an MCERT program, which is a support program where a mental health worker rides along with an OPP officer. And when it was introduced into our communities, it was for all communities, and it was funded by the Ministry of Health, and then that was cut. And now it's an application based for your OPP detachment to apply for that. And it comes from Solicitor General funding. It should come from the Ministry of Health. Mental health is health. And we have to support our rural communities with meaningful investment. Not far from here, there is a private home that you're all familiar with, Three Oaks, that does support the agricultural community as well as our first responders. The province needs to be at the table when it comes to those sort of investments in our health, in our healthcare. And it can't be one-offs. It needs to be sustainable, and we have to recognize that investing in our mental health is as important as investing in our cancer programs. It has to be accessible for all. You shouldn't have to wait for an assessment. You shouldn't have to go to London. You should be able to find supports in your own community, and we'll be there for that.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
it has taken a long time for us as a society, and this is throughout Canada, to recognize mental health as a health care issue. And proper funding for health care, and what we've been talking about with creating these healthcare teams would include mental health in that. We're going to have to start training a whole lot more psychologists and psychiatrists to help out with this public mental health care programming that we desperately need. The waiting list to even see someone for assessment is staggeringly long. And so among our farming community, yes, it is a stressful industry. And certainly all the uncertainties from the weather, the climate, the Trump administration, we need more security there. We've talked about programs to help with that, but healthcare, when it affects the farming family, it affects the whole family. It leads to abuse. It leads to problems in the schools. We are seeing violence in classrooms. That is one of the top issues the teachers have today. Of course, we need more supports with educational workers. So there are a lot of these things that are interlocked, and we need to fund education, healthcare, infrastructure in our rural communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Thanks. So we do support the expansion of healthcare teams, including mental health professionals, including social workers on those teams. But in addition to that, we want to cover mental health and addiction care for everybody under OHIP, which isn't the case right now. We want to increase base funding for community mental health services. We want to ensure retention and recruitment of workers in the community mental health sector by bringing wages up to par with other providers in the sector. We want to integrate mental health and addiction services into the expanded family health teams and walk-in clinics, okay, to improve early intervention. We want to improve access to care by providing virtual care options in rural and remote regions. We want to also address specifically addictions and challenges with care. And that means we need to address substance use through a health and human rights framework, not just a criminal justice framework. Throwing somebody in jail does not cure their addiction. We need to build 60,000 new supportive housing spaces with fully funded wraparound services. We want to reopen the safe consumption and treatment sites closed by the Ford government and expand the number of sites across the province, prioritizing areas with high opioid deaths. And we want to integrate paid peer support workers with lived experience into the planning and organization of all substance use programming. Further to that, we want to invest in the creation and expansion of permanent 24/7 mobile crisis response teams where mental health care workers are deployed when people are experiencing a mental health or substance-related crisis, as well as rapid access addiction medicine clinics. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the question portion of our program. We are now going to provide each one of the candidates with 3 minutes of comments to close, and we'll go in the reverse order that we started. So that starts with Kathy.
Okay, well, great. And once again, thank you to the organizers for putting on tonight and for everyone that submitted a question. There was some wide-ranging questions there, and I do appreciate the opportunity to have had take part in the discussion. So you have a big decision in front of you, and it's one that you cannot take lightly. I know that coming to the decision to run for higher office is one that took me some time to make. We've been told that this election is about one thing, but don't be fooled. It is time to hold Doug Ford accountable for not delivering for you. He has had 7 years to fulfill promises, to invest in things that are important to you. But what has he done? He's invested in his buddies. the selling of Ontario Place for a mega foreign-owned spa, which I don't think many of us in this room will be using anytime soon. The closing of Ontario Science Centre, which I'm sure many of us have enjoyed. You know, he's put his Captain Ontario hat on, but how can he be that when he has systematically dismantled the public health care system by investing in an American model? And of course, the Greenbelt, for which he is being investigated by the RCMP. Do not lose sight of that. You should all be worried because of that. If massive land swaps can happen down the road, not far from here in Elgin County, then it can happen here. You need to be asking yourself, how has any of this benefited you? Where are the healthcare fixes? Where are the education fixes? Where are the housing fixes? Where's the investments in rural Ontario? He didn't get any of it done. He made a lot of promises and he didn't get it done. He does not care for you. He is not your friend. Recently, I was with a group of rural residents who felt let down by previous Liberal governments and policies and projects. They felt that those were not beneficial to rural Ontario. And I reminded them that we have a new leader and are clearly on a new direction. But the point is, I was part of the conversation and took the criticisms and was expected to be held to account for a government I had nothing to do with. Today we have a government that has the largest deficit in Ontario's history, and they aren't here to defend it. I have a track record where I show up, I work for my community, I have hard conversations, I'm not afraid to back down, and I'll do that at Queen's Park.
Thank you. Andrea?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank our hosts for putting this together. It's incredibly important to have these discussions. And it's a fantastic opportunity to meet everybody and to talk about the things that matter to us. Truly, if the enemy of democracy is apathy, then we have the antidote right in front of us right now. And it's really heartening to see. Please take advantage of the advanced polls that are now open to cast your ballot. A snap election in the middle of winter can limit our opportunities to access voting stations. Casting your ballot early ensures that the weather will not prevent you from voting on election day. When you do cast your ballot, please consider the future of publicly funded healthcare, good quality public education, and the well-being of our rural communities. The Green Party of Ontario believes in strong local representation. That means that as your representative, I would not work for Mike Schreiner. I would be working for you and the communities of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex and representing your interests in Queen's Park. I vote according to your needs and wishes. I promise that I will show up for you here, where you live and work, and I will show up for you in Queen's Park, where I cast my ballot at the provincial level. Thank you all.
Thank you. Catherine?
I want to leave you with an image of where we are after 7 years of Ford's government. Imagine, if you will, a train, which we'll call a privatization express, on which Ford has loaded all our children, all our seniors, and all our hopes and dreams. He has handed over operation of the train to a private engineer, with explicit instructions to drive at high speed straight down the track to get it done. But the train is headed straight toward a cliff, and the bridge is out. How do we avert disaster? Do we wring our hands and accept Mr. Ford's assurances that all will be well? No. We do everything in our power to stop that train. You have the power to stop that train, to protect our children and our future prosperity. Now, to extend the metaphor a little further, imagine a different leader jumps a la Harrison Ford onto the train and wrestles control of the engine. Who would you rather take control of the train and guide it safely back to the station? Marit Stiles, who proved herself as leader of the official opposition by holding Doug Ford's feet to the fire over the Greenbelt scandal, over profligate spending on a private spa at Ontario Place, and over Bill 124 that effectively froze the wages of our nurses and other healthcare workers, our teachers and educational assistants. Or the Liberal leader who accepts donations from private healthcare providers to fund her campaign. Vote with your heart and mind. A vote for Catherine Shaler on February 27th, or now with the advanced polls, is a vote for Marit Stiles and a government on your side. Thank you.
Okay, well, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the Lambton, Kent, and Middlesex Federations of Agriculture to thank our 3 candidates who took the time out of their schedules of campaigning to come out and join us tonight. I remind you that all of the candidates were invited to attend, but these ladies took the time, came out and did it. So please show your appreciation to them. Thank you to our timekeepers. They kept them on time and they didn't blow over once, so that was pretty awesome. To the gentleman who took care of the questions, that's excellent. And to all of you for coming out. This is the next best part of the night is the pie that goes with Pie in Politics. We have a nice selection of pies over there, and that is brought to you by the 3 Federations of Agriculture. So please enjoy for the rest of the evening. There's coffee and pie. Thank you very much for coming out.
Anybody have a score on hockey?
I'm in a bubble.
No.